My wife betrayed me with my boss, I exposed their affair, got revenge, divorced, and made them regret everything. Hey Reddit. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 6 years. We had what I thought was a solid marriage, at least, that's what she made me believe. I worked hard to provide for us, putting in long hours at my corporate job. I wanted us to have a good life, a secure future. Meanwhile, she worked part-time and spent most of her free time with friends, shopping, or planning vacations I paid for. I never minded. I loved her, and I thought she loved me. Then, things started changing. Emily became distant, always glued to her phone, smiling at texts she never shared with me. She started dressing up more, going out more often, and suddenly had work dinners and girls' nights way too frequently. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then, the excuses started contradicting each other. One evening, she claimed she was at a late yoga class. But when I called her friend Rachel, the friend she supposedly went with, Rachel was confused. She said they hadn't gone to yoga in months. My heart pounded in my chest. I thanked Rachel, hung up, and sat there in silence. That's when I knew. She was lying to me. I needed proof. I didn't want to believe it, but I wasn't going to confront her without evidence. So, I did what any betrayed husband would do. I became a detective in my own marriage. I started with her phone. She was careful, always keeping it locked. But one night, she left it charging in the bathroom while she was asleep. I took a deep breath, grabbed it, and used her fingerprint while she slept. The moment the screen unlocked, my stomach turned. There it was. A stream of messages. Not from some random guy, but from my boss, Daniel. Daniel was the CEO of the company I worked for. He was powerful, charismatic, and filthy rich. I had looked up to him for years, working my ass off under his leadership, hoping for a promotion. And this was the man my wife had chosen to betray me with. The texts were disgusting. They talked about sneaking around, about how thrilling it was to lie to me, about the expensive gifts he had been buying her. Worse, there were plans. Daniel was pushing her to convince me to take a job in another city, one of the branch offices. He wanted me out of the way permanently. I clenched my fists. My wife and my boss were plotting to get rid of me so they could continue their affair freely. Rage boiled inside me, but I knew I couldn't explode yet. I needed a plan. I needed to destroy them both. First, I made copies of everything. Screenshots of texts, emails, even some scandalous photos they had sent each other. I stored them all on a secure drive. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to ruin them. The next day, I acted normal. I kissed Emily before work. I greeted Daniel in the office, but I started planting seeds of my own. I began subtly mentioning to my colleagues that I had doubts about Daniel's leadership, that I had concerns about his ethics. I knew people gossiped, and I wanted those whispers to start spreading. Then, I set my real plan in motion. I reached out to Daniel's wife, Laura. She was a sophisticated, sharp woman who had always been polite but distant toward me. I invited her to coffee under the pretense of discussing a company event. When we sat down, I slid my phone across the table, open to the evidence of her husband's affair. She stared at it for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, she took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "Let's destroy them together," she said. That was the moment everything shifted. Laura had money, power, and legal connections. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper, to gather more evidence. Meanwhile, I played dumb. I pretended not to know anything while I collected my own arsenal. Emily continued her deception, unaware that her perfect little world was about to collapse. One Friday night, I told her I had to work late and encouraged her to go out. She eagerly agreed. The moment she left, I followed her. As expected, she went straight to a hotel, one Daniel frequented. I had tipped off the pie and Laura, and we all arrived at the same time. What happened next was a spectacle. We stormed into the hotel room, cameras rolling. Emily and Daniel, caught in the act, scrambled like rats. Emily screamed, covering herself, while Daniel tried to threaten us, but Laura shut him down fast. She informed him that divorce papers were already in motion, with financial consequences that would cripple him. As for Emily, I simply looked at her and said, "We're done." She broke down, begging, apologizing, but I had no sympathy left. But I wasn't finished. At work, I released everything to the board of directors. The affair. The corruption. The plot to relocate me. Daniel was fired within days, his reputation in shambles. The news spread, and soon, every business contact he had dropped him. His career was over. Emily, now abandoned and without the luxury lifestyle Daniel provided, came crawling back. She left sobbing voicemails, sent letters, even tried showing up at my door. But I was done. The divorce was swift and brutal. Thanks to Laura's lawyers, I walked away with everything. The house. The savings. Emily got nothing. The last time I saw her, she was standing outside my old office building, looking broken, desperate. I simply walked past her without a word. Daniel, now unemployed and divorced, tried contacting me too. He wanted to apologize, to explain. I blocked him. I had one. But the best part? That was just the beginning of their downfall. And trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. After exposing Emily and Daniel, I thought I was done. I had won, right? I had taken everything from them, my cheating wife was left with nothing, and my corrupt boss lost his career and his marriage. But life has a funny way of showing you that revenge isn't just a single moment. Sometimes, it's a slow, painful burn. And for Emily and Daniel, the fire had just started. Let's start with Daniel. After losing his CEO position, he was blacklisted in the corporate world. Nobody wanted to hire a disgraced executive who got caught in a scandal. His name was toxic, his reputation ruined. I thought he'd at least land a lower-level job somewhere, but no one wanted anything to do with him. Then, Laura, his now ex-wife, made sure to twist the knife deeper. She owned a significant chunk of his assets, including his luxury penthouse. She sold it immediately. Daniel, once used to private jets and five-star hotels, was forced to move into a dingy apartment. His car was repossessed, his bank accounts drained by the brutal divorce settlement. But the real humiliation came when a former rival of his bought out his failed startup and publicly mocked him for being a fraud. It was all over industry news. Daniel wasn't just jobless, he was a joke. And Emily? Oh, her downfall was even worse. After the divorce, she had no home, no job, and no rich husband to support her. She tried reaching out to friends, but they all distanced themselves. Nobody wanted to be associated with a woman who betrayed her loyal husband for a quick thrill. At first, she tried playing the victim, telling people I had been a neglectful husband. But the problem? Everyone had seen the evidence. Screenshots of her texts with Daniel had made their way through social circles, and even her own family sided with me. Her parents were ashamed of her, and her siblings stopped speaking to her. With nowhere to go, she tried moving in with Daniel. That's when she learned something hilarious: Daniel didn't want her. She had ruined her marriage for a man who never actually wanted a future with her. She was just a fling, a temporary distraction. Now that he was broke and desperate, he had no interest in taking care of a woman who could no longer bring him any status or pleasure. She was alone. The last I heard of her, she was working a dead-end job, barely scraping by. The woman who once mocked me for working long hours to provide for her was now struggling to pay rent. And me? I thrived. With Daniel gone, a power shift happened at the company. The board of directors, grateful for exposing his corruption, promoted me to a high-ranking position. I wasn't just another employee anymore, I was running the show. My salary tripled. I bought a new house, a better one than the one Emily and I used to share. I traveled, took vacations I never had time for before, and started focusing on myself. But the best part? I met someone new. A year after my divorce, I ran into an old friend, someone I had lost touch with because I had been too blinded by Emily to see what real connection looked like. We reconnected, and it was different. There were no lies, no betrayals, just genuine happiness. One day, while having dinner at a restaurant, I saw Emily. She was alone at a corner table, eating a cheap meal, looking miserable. Our eyes met for a second, and she looked away, ashamed. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt nothing. And that's when I knew I had truly won. Because the best revenge isn't ruining someone's life. It's living a life so good that they become nothing more than a forgotten chapter. And that's exactly what Emily and Daniel became, just a story from my past, while I moved on to something greater. The end.